Our next speaker has spent years advancing a simple but powerful idea: believe in people. Please join me in welcoming Brian Hooks, CEO and Chairman of Stand Together Trust, and Akash Shogyum, President at FRIA.
Thank you very much, and thank you everybody for being here. We're very excited for the second go-around of the Freedom Conservatism Conference, and this conversation could not happen at a better time. Brian, thank you for being here to join us today.
Yeah, appreciate the invitation. It's good to see you.
Yes, absolutely. Likewise. Always good to be back with my Stand Together friends. So Brian, let me start here. I think most people in this room and the FreeCon community are generally aware of Stand Together, probably specifically so within the context of the work Stand Together does in the public policy space. Much of that obviously centered here in Washington. But how do you describe what Stand Together is and what makes Stand Together unique in this ecosystem?
Well, you know, we are kind of an odd duck when it comes to organizations in the movement for liberty. We're a philanthropic community, which means we're not a single benefactor philanthropy. We've got about a dozen different organizations that all tier up to the Stand Together umbrella. But we are a community of leaders, business leaders, philanthropic leaders, social entrepreneurs, public policy leaders, who are all doing different things to achieve the same goal. And that is that we are working to help our country better live up to the principles in the Declaration of Independence, because we know that when we do, good things happen. We do that in a number of different ways, and I'm thrilled to see so many friends in the crowd today who we get to partner with, who are doing the hard work to remove the barriers that prevent people from realizing their potential. Because we know that as a society, when we're structured where we do that systematically, where our institutions empower people to overcome barriers that come to them and make progress, not only do those people live better lives, but when we do that at scale, that's how we make progress as a society. So we're working for a free society, and we're doing it through partnerships with a lot of the groups here and many more.
Yeah, that's great. And I think when we think of it in the context of the role of public policy, it's a pretty straightforward equation, right? Government creates a lot of barriers to human flourishing and progress. What does that look like outside of government? I think one of the things that I've long wanted to make sure people inside of Washington knew was the great work that Stand Together does and supports outside of Washington, specifically as it pertains to civil society and communities. And I think the reason, especially in this room of self-described conservatives, is we talk a lot about the role of faith-based groups and civil society, families, communities, but oftentimes it's kind of in the abstract. Stand Together takes that beyond the abstract and actually gets your hands dirty, so to speak. So give us a couple examples of what those partnerships with faith-based groups or community groups look like and kind of how they help facilitate human flourishing.
Sure, I'm happy to talk about our work, but before I do, I just want to congratulate you and Ovik and John and everybody else who had this vision to bring this group of Freedom Conservatives together. I'm super excited about what this organization, this movement is doing. I think it couldn't come at a better time, as you said a minute ago. You'll remember in our old offices at Stand Together, you got off the elevator and we had a quote on the wall. Stephanie quoted Hayek a couple of times. I'm going to pile on. The quote was that we must once again make the building of a free society an intellectual adventure. And then he goes on to say it has to be a deed of courage. And I think that that's absolutely what we have to take on right now. The free society doesn't happen on its own. It requires intellectual entrepreneurs, people that Stephanie was talking about, who can plant the ideas that become the norms, generations later. But in the moment, and we're in one of those moments right now, we need social entrepreneurs, public policy entrepreneurs who have the courage of their convictions to demonstrate how these principles actually help solve the problems that are proximate, that are right in front of us today. And that's a big part of what we try to do at Stand Together. And again, we do that, and we have the good fortune to do that in partnership with thousands of organizations all throughout the country. We operate, as you say, very significant focus in public policy. We're doing more in policy than we ever have, both at the federal level and in all 50 states. And as you know, we're seeing quite a lot of progress in the states and not a lot of progress in the federal level. But we also operate in 1,300 communities across the United States, working to bring some light to the good work that's happening in civil society. Because as classical liberals, as people who believe in a free society, people who understand the importance of the principles that are articulated in our country's declaration, we know that those principles enable people to live well together. And if we overlook those stories and we only focus on the things that we have to constrain, that being the overreach of government authority, which is super important to constrain, we miss the opportunity to bring people into the positive vision for our country. And so, give you just a couple of quick examples. Incredible entrepreneurs, people who are acting on those principles to help people to live better lives. And there's hundreds of these stories. John mentioned the renaissance in school, in educational freedom and school choice that we've experienced, and Stand Together, Americans for Prosperity, Yes Every Kid, and Ed Choice. A number of the organizations within the Stand Together community have been working hard to push the public policy changes that are required to create the space for civil society to come in and help bring real solutions to people. But a group like the Vela Education Fund is then the other side of that coin. Once we have the freedom to choose, we need to make sure we have good choices. And so the Vela Education Fund has supported more than 5,000 education entrepreneurs in all 50 states that are helping offer families the opportunity to have the education that meets the needs of their kids, as an example. Give you one more example. Stephanie also mentioned the need to really sort of exemplify a virtuous life. We have faith communities all throughout the country where people have, almost by definition, raised their hand and said, "Put me in, coach." Right? I'm here to help solve problems in our communities. But often that demand, that willingness, is not met by the supply of opportunities to help. And we've found an incredible organization called Care Portal. You know Care Portal well. It's a basic technological platform. It connects those people in the faith communities who want to help with families who are at risk of losing their kids to the foster care system. And those faith communities, those members of those congregations, they don't just deliver dollars to the families who are struggling. They deliver community, right? They come alongside a mother who hasn't been able to feed her kid properly for the last few weeks, and therefore her kid's gotten reported to Child Protective Services, and there's a case that says, hey, we may have to take the kid away from the family. The church comes in and says, well, look, we could definitely, absolutely help you meet the needs, the material needs of your child, get you some food. But what else is going on? What you need is relationships that can help you to overcome whatever other barriers you might be facing. And when you do that at scale, in this case, Care Portal's helped over 400,000 kids stay with their families. You start to build the muscles of civil society that realize the promise of these principles that our country's founded on.
Yeah, it's fantastic. And, that first panel talked about it. A lot of these conversations will talk about what is the role of government versus what is the role of individuals, families, communities, civil society. And I think the Care Portal example is so illustrative. At FreeOp, we just launched the Center for Safe and Stable Futures, which is sort of a one-of-a-kind policy hub for child welfare policy. And the principle is that government has a really basic role to ensure safety, right? If somebody's being abused in their home and needs to be in a better situation, government can play that role, but government will never replace a family. Government will never facilitate community or, build relationships, create stability, and help a child build a future. But then it lends the question of, okay, well then who will? And Care Portal is one of the answers of the who will. And Stand Together does such important work to build up organizations like that. I think of another example, if you wouldn't mind sharing with this group, Brian, is the Phoenix, which has been a kind of a long-standing partner. But tell us a little bit about what the Phoenix does. And let me just tee that up by saying the reason I think it's so valuable is we talk so much about building a virtuous life, but people run into all kinds of problems. And the state is just simply not equipped to help solve these problems. And so you need entities like the Phoenix to get people on the pathway to a virtuous life that is so critical to the free competition.
Yeah, there's hundreds of these organizations that we get to support, and each one of them has dozens of really incredible stories. I look at all of this as de Tocqueville in action, basically. He talked about when Americans see a problem, they don't wait for somebody else to solve it. They come together, they unite, and they innovate on a solution. And that's absolutely still the story of our country, and we need to lift these stories up because this is how we compete with the top-down approach that we're seeing now at the extremes of both ends of the political spectrum. The idea that we can't solve our own problems as Americans, and so give me the power and I'll fix it for you. How well has that worked throughout the history of the world? Not so well. The Phoenix is an example that demonstrates that we absolutely can solve our own problems, and we can solve really hard problems. The Phoenix tackles the problem of addiction. This is not an issue that I knew very much about until we started working with the Phoenix about 10 years ago. Turns out there's 40 million Americans in this country that have at some point struggled with addiction. Each one of those people has a family, which means it's safe to say that well over 100 million people are affected by this problem in any given year. You all probably know the statistics about deaths of despair, the work of Angus Deason, who talked about over 100,000 deaths from overdoses just a couple of years ago. It's a big problem. The best solutions that we have for this, sort of in the mainstream, we treat a drug with a drug, methadone. Keeps people alive, but it condemns them to a pretty miserable existence. The best clinical programs, about 45% effective, with thousands of dollars a day, and chances are it won't work. Phoenix comes along. It's this sort of unlikely entrepreneur, Scott Strode. Scott is somebody who himself struggled with addiction for a long time. Got sober by showing up in a gym and working out with people who showed up for him, cared about him, and taught him that he was more than his addiction, that he was somebody who had a gift, and it might take some time, but he could find it, he could build a productive life on that gift. Scott, for 10 years, ran this organization, the Phoenix, helped about 10,000 people to follow in his footsteps and become sober that way through this power of exercise and the community that the Phoenix surrounds people with. We met him about 10 years ago, and last year the Phoenix crossed the 1 million person mark. Helped 1 million people. Thank you. They're a phenomenal organization. But that's not where the story stops. Scott actually shared that news with me last year with a selfie video. And in the same breath where he said, we did it, we crossed the 1 million person mark, he said, but we're not slowing down on the trajectory that we're on. I think we can hit 10 million in the next 3 years. The Phoenix is free to anybody who's 48 hours sober. And it's solved because it's people coming together to help each other to succeed. They're pursuing the principles in our declaration. This is what the founders had in mind. Free people can accomplish extraordinary things. When you give them the opportunity to show you what they've got.
Yeah, that's fantastic. Let's turn a little bit to kind of the ideological questions. And again, I think these examples are illustrative because for the folks in this room, we should never, ever let sort of the big government crowd tell us that there's a problem that people can't solve left to their own devices together, right? It's not that individuals have to solve problems on their own, but that communities and families and civil society institutions can solve them, and we see these examples every day. So, Brian, how do you contrast that with what we're seeing in the political space, right? I wrote this question to say Washington, but it's not just Washington, right? You look at who just got elected in New York City. I mean, why do you think there is such a mentality of needing to drive top-down solutions from government? Do you think it's bad incentives? Do you think it's bad philosophy? What do you think has caused this kind of reversal of how we want policymakers to think about things?
Well, let me leave the backwards looking sort of the diagnosis to others for the moment, because our time is short. And I think, to me, the more interesting question is, what do we do about it? And I happen to think that this is our moment. And to be more specific, I think this is your moment. The Freedom Conservatives, the broad-based Fusion Coalition, however you conceive of this, the people who believe in a free society and can back that belief up with real action plans for how we act on that belief. This is our moment. you think about it, we've just gone through a period of incredible disruption. The institutions that we've relied upon for the past few generations to help us make decisions and live orderly lives have been disrupted. All of them. Right? Education, business, the relationships in communities, the public policy, faith, family, all of them have been basically turned on their head. This is a moment where the uncertainty that creates opens up the opportunity for conflict entrepreneurs, for charlatans, for snake oil salesmen, for people who come in and say, I can fix your problems that are being caused by those people as long as you give me the power. And that's what we're seeing right now. And look, people can be forgiven for buying into that. This is a very, very difficult time for a lot of folks. But we would be wrong to assume that just because they're buying into that, that's what they want. I think it's our responsibility, and it's up to us to make the case for a better way. How do we reimagine the institutions that can help us live well together based on our founding principles, on the principles of a free society that we know work, and make a more compelling case than the extremes on the authoritarian right and on the socialist left? This is a pretty low bar, but we have to be able to rise to the occasion, and we can't just live in theory. We absolutely have to make this case at a very practical level. The American people are with us. I mean, the other panelists talked about the polling. People don't love the side that they've gravitated towards. They just are afraid of the other side. And so what is our agenda? We talked about the momentum on education. We've got an agenda there. Let's not let that get captured. Let's put our foot on the gas. How do we make sure that people see opportunities in the economy, right? We got to continue the work that you were so instrumental in, Akash, working with us at Americans for Prosperity, and remove the regulatory barriers that are inhibiting the entrepreneurs from driving growth. Right? There's a conversation about technology right now. Are we going to give in to people who say ban AI? Or are we going to say, no, this is a tool that can help those who have been left behind rise? Right? We have good ideas, but we can't be the dog that caught the car on this one. We can't be in a position where we should be able to win, but we're not ready. I remember and I'm sure many of you do, in 2017, when for a long time, many of us, myself included, have been advocating alternatives to Obamacare. And all of a sudden, there was an opportunity to put one in place, and we weren't ready. We need to learn from those kinds of experiences and say, no, we've got to actually have detailed plans. We can't let, minor differences within our coalition fracture us. The American people are looking for a better way. Our ideas deliver the results that they need, and we just gotta put it forward.
Let me ask you one last question. Obviously, at Stand Together and elsewhere, we've talked a lot about the structure of social change, what it actually takes to change public policy. How do you think about what the structure of social change actually is today? And when you think about this group, clearly we've had plenty of successes at the state level in particular, but what do we need to do differently, sort of strategically and tactically, than we've done in the past that led us to this point?
Well, I grew up at the Mercatus Center, surrounded by people like Tyler Cowen and Peter Boettke and the Austrians, and so Hayek is sort of very front of mind for me, and he had a lot of respect for the institutions that have gotten us to where we are. Right, and in many ways he was an incrementalist in terms of pushing innovation, but not throwing out the baby with the bathwater. And I think there's a lot of wisdom to that now. I think a lot of the organizations, many of you work for organizations that have done really, really good work over the years. And so I think that the investment in the ideas in the academy, I think the translation of those ideas through the think tanks, I think making sure that we are doing everything we can within the traditional media landscape, that stuff is still important. We shouldn't throw that out. But if that's all we do and we sort of optimize there, we're going to miss the boat. And so I think we need to make the positive case for ideas to the American people. We need to make it easy for them to participate in those ideas. And I think that the new avenues for doing that, whether that's the creator economy, whether that's culture more broadly, or whether that's just a recognition that, as somebody said earlier, that the old institutions like political parties just aren't really doing it for people anymore, and so there's room for innovation there. I think there's a real opportunity there. And as people who believe in entrepreneurship and human potential, again, I think this group, all of us, are well situated to make the most of this moment.
Absolutely. One final question, Brian. Clearly, the 250th anniversary presents an opportunity for freedom conservatives. And you talk about empowering Americans to kind of live those principles, right? Live our ideas. What would be your final call to action for free cons, not just in the policy space, but again, in communities that we do have this challenge that we're facing of top-down kind of ideas, but we have the context of the 250th. What would be your call to action to reinvigorate our founding principles here in Washington and across the country through this crowd?
Look, I think that people need to know two things. And when they do, there's nothing that they can't accomplish. I think they need to know that they matter, that they have agency to address whatever problems in front of them. And I think that they need to know that they belong, that they're not the only ones that want to make things better. And when we can help them see that, they can have an optimistic perspective, not a Pollyannish perspective, but a belief that the future has a place for them, then I think freedom can win. And I think that we've demonstrated that time and time again in the history of our country. When it looked like it may be the end of this experiment, we've come together as a country and we've shown people what it means to act on these principles to make things better. And I think with the capabilities in this room and this larger movement, that's our opportunity. And each one of us is going to have to figure out what that means for how we take action on that. But when we do that as a movement, when we do that recognizing that my action is going to build on yours and yours is going to build on mine and so on, I think we can get it done.
That's fantastic. Make sure you grab a copy of Believe in People out front. Brian, thank you very much for being here and everything standing here.
Thank you. Thanks for doing it.
Thank you, Brian. And thank you again to Stand Together Trust for supporting this conversation.